Let us start by looking at the setup for this disastrous afternoon. We have Alexis and Rick, two deeply entrenched legacy characters, bustling about to help Molly prepare for the highly anticipated launch of her debut novel. Now, if we pause and reflect on the rich, complicated history between Alexis and Rick, we are talking about a dynamic that used to set the screen on fire. They were not exactly a traditional super couple, but their history is fraught with intense passion, bitter betrayals, and complex legal and emotional entanglements that kept us glued to our screens for years. Seeing them put aside their historically volatile differences to support Molly is a beautiful, heartwarming nod to their growth as parents. It is the kind of mature character development we veteran fans crave. However, it also deliberately lulls us into a false sense of security. Alexis, a brilliant woman who has battled demons, dangerous mobsters, and her own tragic family curse, is entirely distracted by the trivialities of party planning. Rick, a man whose brilliant mind used to operate like a steel trap, always anticipating the next threat from his enemies, is seemingly oblivious to the dark shadows creeping into the venue. Is this true character integrity? Would the Rick of 20 years ago really fail to notice the sinister elements gathering around his daughter's momentous occasion? It feels as though the writers have temporarily dimmed their legendary sharp instincts purely to facilitate the plot. The event itself is taking place at the beautiful sprawling pool deck. Anyone who has watched this show for more than a decade knows that this particular venue is practically a giant magnet for high-stakes catastrophe. From terrifying hostage crises to shocking sniper attacks, this location has seen far more blood and tears than it has joyous celebrations. Yet, our beloved characters continue to gather there, dressed to the nines, sipping expensive champagne as if history has taught them absolutely nothing about situational awareness. Molly, who has grown up before our very eyes, from a precocious teenager into a brilliant young woman, truly deserves a moment of unadulterated triumph. Her debut novel launch should be a testament to her resilience, her intellect, and her bright future. Instead, it is merely utilized as a glamorous backdrop, a glittering stage set for a heartbreaking nightmare. The guest list is extensive, which is the classic soap opera recipe for a locked room mystery or a chaotic whodunit. With so many people mingling, the background noise and the clinking glasses provide the perfect, overwhelming cover for malevolence. It is a classic misdirection tactic, highly reminiscent of the grand charity balls of the 80s and 90s, where the sheer volume of extras perfectly masked the villain's silent approach. Amidst this crowded, joyful celebration, we witness the arrival of Drew. Here is a man whose entire history is steeped in intense military discipline, elite physical prowess, and immense inner strength. He is a highly trained former operative, a man who has miraculously survived mind mapping, brutal kidnappings, and the worst psychological tortures imaginable. Yet, right now, he is trapped in an incredibly vulnerable state, confined to a wheelchair, recovering from being heavily drugged, and tragically unable to even speak a word to defend himself or call out for help. The visual of Drew in this incapacitated state is heartbreaking enough for those of us who remember his vibrant past, but the circumstances of his arrival amplify the emotional stakes to an almost unbearable degree. We are told that his young daughter, Scout, might be the one bravely pushing his wheelchair through the crowd, or perhaps the ever-protective Willow is walking closely by his side. The image of little Scout, a precious child of legacy, tenderly assisting her strong father, brings a genuine tear to the eye. It is a rare moment of pure, unadulterated innocence amidst a town that is so often completely corrupted by violence and greed. But as veteran fans, we know all too well that innocence in this fictional universe is never allowed to simply exist. It is always ruthlessly exploited for maximum dramatic effect. And exploited it is in the most cowardly, sickening, and horrifying manner imaginable. While the party rages on, while Alexis and Rick are preoccupied with proud parental toasts and Molly is happily basking in her literary achievement, someone commits an act of unspeakable cruelty. Someone deliberately pushes Drew, still strapped into his heavy wheelchair, directly into the deep end of the pool. I want you to truly visualize the psychological and physical horror of this specific moment. A proud, strong man who currently cannot move his limbs, who cannot cry out for help, plunging helplessly into the cold water. This is not just an attempted murder. It is a sadistic, torturous execution of a completely helpless victim. During the golden era of soap operas, even the most wicked villains had a certain twisted code of honor. Even the most diabolical masterminds preferred a grand confrontation where they could look their victim in the eye and gloat about their victory. Pushing a paralyzed man into a pool from behind is the act of a desperate, chaotic coward who lacks any sense of theatrical grandeur, it immediately begs the deeply frustrating question, where were the protective instincts of his family? How did someone manage to separate Drew from Scout or Willow long enough to commit this atrocity without drawing a single glance from the dozens of guests standing mere feet away? The narrative contrivances required to make this scene happen are frankly staggering and test the limits of our suspension of disbelief. But the nightmare does not end with Drew desperately fighting for his life beneath the surface of the water. While the inevitable screaming panic ensues on the pool deck, while terrified guests rush to the edge and someone hopefully dives in to rescue the drowning man, a second, perhaps even more devastating tragedy unfolds in the unguarded shadows. Danny goes suddenly, inexplicably missing. Danny, the beloved son of Jason, a young boy carrying the incredibly heavy, blood-soaked legacy of two of the most powerful families in town. If you ask me, the abduction of a legacy child is a sacred narrative trope that must always be handled with the utmost respect for long-term storytelling. We have watched Jason sacrifice his own personal happiness, his freedom, and his very presence in his children's lives for decades, all to keep them safe from the dangerous mobsters and lethal enemies that constantly surround him. For his son to be snatched at a public, heavily populated event, surrounded by his own family, is a devastating blow to that entire decades-long narrative. It renders Jason's lifelong, painful sacrifices almost entirely meaningless if his precious son can be taken so easily while everyone is distracted by a splash in the water. The chilling, heart-stopping realization of Danny's disappearance does not happen immediately, which only adds to the agonizing suspense. It is eventually discovered through a classic time-honored soap opera device that we have seen utilized brilliantly for decades. The dropped personal item. Scout, or perhaps another observant guest who has finally pulled their eyes away from the pool, stumbles upon something crucial belonging to Danny left behind on the wet deck. Perhaps it is a special watch, a specific trinket, or something deeply personal that Danny would never, ever willingly part with under normal circumstances. The very moment that specific item is found, the atmosphere shifts violently from the chaotic, loud rescue of Drew to a cold, silent, paralyzing dread. The kidnapper, either in their frantic haste to escape or perhaps in a deliberate, mocking taunt to the family, dropped this vital clue. It is a terrifying breadcrumb that instantly alerts the family that Danny did not just wander off to get a slice of cake. He was forcibly taken against his will. This traditional method of discovery is deeply nostalgic for us veteran viewers, reminding us of the days when physical evidence, not just instant cell phone tracking or magical security footage, drove the gripping mystery forward. It forces the characters to rely on their raw instincts, their rising fear, and their intimate knowledge of their loved ones to piece together the horrific truth. So, as we sit on the edge of our seats, we must ask ourselves, who is the wicked architect of this dual tragedy? Who possesses the sheer audacity and utter lack of morality to drown a disabled veteran and kidnap an innocent child in one fell swoop? The immediate suspect that comes to mind is the dangerous fugitive, Jens. We know that this chaotic, highly vengeful force has been lurking around the premises, hiding in plain sight like a predator waiting to strike. Jens is not an elegant mastermind in the vein of the classic villains we grew up watching. He is a brutal thug, a man driven by immediate, fiery retaliation and a dark desire to inflict maximum emotional and physical pain on his enemies. Pushing a helpless man into the pool serves as the perfect, horrific distraction for a man like him. While every single eye is frantically trained on the water, while the hotel security guards and panicked family members rush to save a drowning Drew, the perimeter of the party is left completely unguarded. It is a sick, twisted, but undeniably highly effective tactical maneuver. Jens violently dragging Danny away into the labyrinth of the hotel corridors while the pool deck descends into sheer pandemonium fits perfectly with his reckless, highly destructive nature. He desperately wants to hurt the people who defied him, and striking at the vulnerable children is the fastest, most agonizing way to completely shatter a family's foundation. However, as seasoned viewers, we cannot ignore the other dark, calculating shadow currently looming over the city, Ross. An incredibly dirty agent with deep access to government resources, highly classified intelligence, and a complete chilling disregard for human life, Ross operates very differently than Jens. If Ross is the one secretly behind this coordinated attack, the kidnapping of Danny is not an act of chaotic, angry revenge, but a highly calculated, strategic move to gain ultimate leverage. Ross knows perfectly well that Jason is currently sitting in custody, stoically covering up a massive, dangerous secret to protect others. What better, more effective way to completely control a lethal, unyielding enforcer like Jason than to cruelly hold his eldest son hostage? But would a highly trained, sophisticated agent truly resort to something as crude as pushing a wheelchair into a pool? Perhaps, if he absolutely needed to create a diversion massive enough to blind the hotel's security cameras, occupy the staff, and empty the surrounding hallways for a clean extraction. Ross represents the cold, modern era of soap opera villains, bureaucratic, soulless, and entirely devoid of the theatrical, uh, dramatic flair that made the iconic villains of the 90s so utterly mesmerizing to watch. If Ross is indeed the culprit, Danny is not just in physical danger, he is a tiny, helpless pawn in a much larger, highly dangerous global conspiracy. Let us take a solemn moment to deeply consider the profound emotional toll this horrific afternoon will take on the strong women of our beloved show. Alexis, who proudly hosted this beautiful party with such immense hope and joy for her brilliant daughter Molly, will undoubtedly blame her own self for the tragedy. The crushing guilt of hosting an event that suddenly turned into a dangerous hunting ground will weigh incredibly heavily on her already burdened, weary soul. And what of the fierce mothers of the victims? The rich legacy of motherhood on this show is entirely built on fierce, unyielding, lioness-like protection. To have a child violently snatched away is a specific type of pain that echoes back to the absolute most iconic, tear-jerking storylines of our golden era. We vividly remember the raw anguish of mothers desperately searching for their stolen babies in the rain, the way the entire town would drop everything to mobilize and search every alleyway. I expect absolutely nothing less than a full-scale, relentless mobilization now. The women of this show, from the wise Alexis to the gentle Willow, must channel the legendary strength of the powerful matriarchs who came before them. They cannot simply sit back and wait for the police to file a report. They must loudly demand answers, aggressively tear apart the hotel room by room if necessary, and fiercely protect their own blood. The stark, visual contrast between the glittering, sunlit surface of the elegant pool party and the dark, murky, terrifying depths of the crimes committed is a poetic, if somewhat heavy-handed, metaphor for the town itself. On the beautiful surface, it is a town of immense wealth, fine literature, glamorous galas, and stunningly beautiful people. But just beneath the pristine water, there is a constant, suffocating, ever-present threat of violence. Molly's debut novel, a wonderful symbol of creative birth and towering intellect, is entirely, tragically overshadowed by acts of primal, mindless violence. It is a profound tragedy that her hard-earned moment in the bright sun is cruelly eclipsed by the darkness of wicked men who solve their endless problems with brute force and terror. As a loyal audience, we are completely robbed of the simple, pure joy of seeing Molly succeed and celebrate, forced instead to endure yet another exhausting cycle of trauma and fear. This is the frustrating double-edged sword of long-term storytelling. We absolutely love the high-stakes drama, but we also deeply yearn to see our beloved, long-suffering characters experience genuine, uninterrupted happiness, even if just for one single peaceful episode. Furthermore, the shocking kidnapping of Danny forces us to critically re-examine the complicated, bloody legacy of Jason. For decades, we have fiercely debated whether Jason's violent lifestyle was a necessary, tragic evil to protect his loved ones from worse monsters, or a selfish, adrenaline-fueled addiction to danger that inherently, constantly put his family at terrible risk. This catastrophic event brings that long-standing debate to a tragic, unavoidable head. Danny is unfairly paying the ultimate price for the sins of the fathers, a literary theme as old as storytelling itself. The poor boy has already endured so much trauma in his young life, growing up in the heavy, dark shadow of a legendary enforcer. To have him targeted directly, pulled away from his family, is a brutal, sobering reminder that in this fictional universe, the innocent children of the mob are never truly safe from the consequences of their parents' choices. The writers are playing a very dangerous game with character integrity here. If the mighty Jason cannot protect his own son from behind the cold bars of a jail cell, it completely shatters the powerful mythos of his omnipotence that the show has spent 30 years carefully building and reinforcing. In the end, as the loud police sirens inevitably wail in the distance, and the once beautiful poolside is clinically taped off as a cold crime scene, we are left to sift through the heavy emotional wreckage alongside our favorite characters. The haunting image of the abandoned, empty wheelchair sitting by the water's edge, the chaotic ripples fading in the pool, and the small, dropped personal item belonging to a missing boy will undoubtedly haunt the narrative for many weeks to come. It is deeply frustrating, it is profoundly heartbreaking, and at times it feels like a cruel betrayal of the safety and peace we so desperately wish for these people we have known for decades. Yet, I must confess, this is precisely why we remain seated in front of our television screens year after year, decade after decade. Our passion for this show, for these deeply flawed, endlessly resilient, wonderfully complex characters, remains steadfast and true. We willingly endure the sometimes chaotic writing and the endlessly recycled traumas because we wholeheartedly believe in the enduring strength of their shared history. We will faithfully watch, we will passionately critique, and we will wait with bated breath for the glorious moment when the legacy characters rise from the ashes of this disaster, reclaim their stolen children, and bring the wicked villains to swift, satisfying justice. That is the true, undeniable magic of the soap opera genre, and no matter how dark the story gets, our loyalty to the rich history of this town will never, ever waver.